of this session on the front lawn of Spitz. And I think if you go out to the front lawn of Spitz, there's actually a little dirt circle, where I've worn the grass away. It no longer grows because we spent so much time doing panoramas. I consider doing it outside, but there's not much benefit. And my yard is completely dominated by really tall oak trees. And there, it doesn't make any sense. There isn't an open area to take a pan anyway. So I'm gonna do it with screen sharing here. That said, let me get the screen share going here. All right, so the subject here is how we address putting these panoramas into Starry Night. And there are some challenges and some interesting creative things that you can do with photography. And then we're also going to cover how to actually place them into Starry Night on the technical side. But I want to start with photography, and in particular, things specific to where you're going to be, the aesthetics of photography. I'll begin with the concept of cameras. We live in a different era than we were when I started shooting panoramas back in the early 2000s. The only way to really do it was to have an SLR or a digital camera, shoot the panorama, take multiple photographs, and then stitch them all together. I actually still prefer that method, really just for one reason. It's very, very easy now to go out with your phone and just put it in panoramic mode and spin around in 360. The only reason I don't do this, and I would like input actually, if people have been successful with this, what I find when I try to take a pan with my phone is that I'll see a very nice tall field of view, a nice vertical area. And then when I get done with the pan, the software always wants to crop it for me. And I end up losing so much of the pan in the vertical that I wish I could go back and set it. Now, there are probably panoramic applications that let you set all kinds of things. But one thing I do like about using an actual camera and shooting multiple pictures is I have a great deal of control over what I get in the vertical. And another nice thing about using a regular camera and taking multiple pictures is I can actually cheat a little. I can go a little higher in this section, a little lower in this section, a little higher in this section. And then later on in editing software, sort of shift them about a little bit so I can actually cheat and get a little higher here and cheat and get a little lower here. I find if I try to do that with a phone, again, it starts auto cropping. So if it's working on a phone, by all means use a phone. But I'm going to address this from the standpoint of shooting with a conventional camera for a little bit. I'm not an expert in photography. If you ask me about lens settings or f-stops or whatever, I just scratch my head and give you a dumb look. I don't know a lot about cameras. The one thing I will tell you about panoramic photography, if you're going to use an SLR or a manual camera, is it's tempting to shoot it in very wide angle mode, right? To maybe even get a wide angle lens. And if those of you who are photo savvy will know what the problem is, with a wide angle lens, you get barrel distortion. The edges of the image get smaller and you end up with a barrel shaped image. When you try to stitch those images together in photography software or stitching software, that barrel distortion really works against you. So I like really just the stock lenses that come with a 35mm lens. And I like trying to shoot everything very flat. I think you'll find you get the best results with that. So other than that, in terms of photography, I don't think much about it. I let the camera set itself automatically. And the reason is because the photo stitching software that I like the best, Panorama Factory, does such a brilliant job of adjusting light levels between the photographs that I don't even try to norm out the photo colors. If one's a little darker, one's a little brighter, I think you'll find that Panorama Factory will fix that. And I'm going to cover Panorama Factory in detail a little bit later. So I want to start here by talking about a few of the aesthetic considerations, and especially where you want to be and what you want to see with a photographic panorama. The reason I put up this image is something that amuses me. You guys have probably been driving in the mountains or in high terrain at some point, and you're driving along and you see one of those scenic overlooks. There's like a pull off and it's way up high on a mountainside or there's a big valley there. And I'm always a little amused when I see people standing at those scenic overlooks and shooting a picture at the scenic overlook, because the reason it's there is you can see 9 states, and it just goes on forever. And every time I've taken a picture at a scenic overlook, what you get is something like this cornfield picture that I'm showing here. It's brown at the bottom and it's blue at the top. There's no detail at all. And this is an actual panorama that somebody shot for Starry Night. They were in like Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They went out in the middle of a cornfield, and their thinking was, I'm going to be able to see very far away. And the only detail that's even interesting in this panorama is this building that's about 26 pixels across, that's maybe like a farm shed or something. I think it's much more effective with panoramas to think about prominent objects that are within the field of view. This is a mission in Santa Barbara, California. And I loved this location because not only was it a nice sort of wide field of view, but also there was this really prominent structure that everybody recognizes as being associated with Santa Barbara. So consider in your location whether you're in a place where there's a structure that is going to mean something to people. If you're just shooting trees off in the distance, that might be okay, but it's really satisfying to have a prominent, really noticeable thing. And it also will give people something to orient by, right? If people know that there's this great courtyard and there's a big cathedral in the north, then their eyes are automatically oriented to north, south, east, and west. So consider familiar, interesting, recognizable things that are somewhat in the foreground. All right. One thing to consider very carefully are the lighting conditions too. In Starry Night, the sun is placed artificially in the sky, and as the sun moves across the sky, the shadows ought to move with it, right? And this is San Jose, California. It's right downtown. And the problem is I shot it on such a bright day that it's very, very clear where the sun is in my panorama, right? Even if you're not thinking about it, the sun is over here because there's this very distinct shadow here, very distinct shadow here. So what I like is to take panoramas on days that are a little bit hazy. If you've got a really uniform cloud cover and there's a little bit of haze, you get this very, very even light. And even though it's a little bit undersaturated, even though, it's not as spectacular a day visually, there aren't any shadows here that are cheating to tell you whether it's, the sun is in the left or the right. Someday, this is one of the next aesthetic things I've challenged Clint to do. Someday I'm hoping we'll write some shaders that actually move shadows across surfaces. I think that would be really fun as the sun moves across the sky. Until we get there, it's a good idea to try to shoot on a hazy day. You also want to watch out for partly cloudy, right? Big puffy clouds in the sky. Because what'll often happen is you'll go out, you'll find your perfect location, you'll shoot a shot, and then a cloud will get in the way of the sun. And that one is way, way darker than the one before. And then when the sun comes out again, your camera's trying to, get the settings right again. Panorama Factory can fix some mistakes, but one shot that's super bright and one that's cloudy, it's probably not going to work. I want to address one more thing that has to do with where you're standing, where you choose to shoot the panorama from. I'm surprised how often people, when we talk about the fact that you can put a panorama into Starry Night, the first thing they'll say is, oh, great, I'm going to go out to the roof of my building and I'm going to shoot a panorama. That's one of the worst things you can possibly do for a couple of reasons. First of all, almost all the details on the roof of the building are roof. You're going to have these little capped, exhaust pipes. You're going to have these goofy little walls around that sort of hide the roof or keep people from falling off. The ground is really awful. Another problem is that the foreground roof obscures the things close by, right? We can't see anything that's immediately around this building because the roof is cutting off everything out to about, 20, 30 feet away from me. But the planetarium director here was insistent that we go to the roof. And another problem with this, it's a little more subtle. When we're inside a planetarium and we're sitting in the seats, unless it's an extremely tilted dome, we're looking up at the horizon, right? We're below the horizon looking up. This feels very confusing in a planetarium because you're above the horizon looking down. Visually, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. So if I go back to this document, one thing that I like to think about as well is whether things are above us or below us. This is one of those panoramas in Starry Night that I really like, the lake panorama, because the detail on these rocks in the foreground is really good. They're really great looking rocks. But essentially what we're doing is looking down. I really love a panorama where you're in a place that's a little bit lower than the surrounding buildings. And the impression is that you're looking up at everything. This is the City of Arts and Sciences in Valencia, Spain. And I was happy to see that I was a little bit down the hill from this building. Well, it's tall and it works, but I was also a little bit down the hill from this building up here. And when you put this on the dome, it's got a very natural feel because you're looking a little upward at everything. So if you can find a location that's maybe a bit lower, maybe there's a little, there's a fountain that's turned off or whatever, and you're looking up at things, that can also help your panorama's appearance too. One other thing that you want to think about is, does the stuff in the foreground fit into view? I wanted to get a photograph of the Children's Museum in Hartford. And the problem is there's trees all over the property. And if the trees don't fit into the view, you've got a couple of choices. You can try to Photoshop them out, or in this case, I sort of Photoshopped the leaves up a little bit, but there was only a certain amount of height I could get out of it. So they all had this artificial flat look. I took a panorama at an elementary school in Fort Leavenworth, Texas, and it was a playground. I thought everything was perfect. I had the school right behind me. It fit right into the frame. Out there were sort of playground equipment. And I didn't notice I was standing right next to I think it was like a basketball hoop on a pole or something. And I ended up right next to that basketball hoop. And then when I went back in and looked at my panorama, I ended up having to get rid of that basketball hoop. So, one thing you want to make sure of is things fit into view. Occasionally you'll run into this problem here, where there's an object in the foreground that doesn't fit, but it's a really simple thing like a flagpole. This was the case when I shot Spitz. The flagpole technically didn't fit into my field of view. So what I did was I just pointed my camera up and I shot the flagpole. And actually I have a version where I actually Photoshopped the flag on as well. So if something really good doesn't fit in, don't be shy about pointing your camera up and then Photoshopping it in later. With San Jose here, the Fairmont Hotel did not fit in. I was not able to capture the Fairmont Hotel. So what I did is I've shortened it by about 8 floors. I took the top of the hotel, I lowered it down, I chopped out a few floors. This is about half the vertical height of the Fairmont Hotel. And I don't think you can tell at all, just because, I just pointed the camera up, shot the top, brought the top down, and then did a little geometry correction. So that's a trick that will work for your panorama. All right, so I want to talk about the process of actually taking the photos. One of the things that I like to do when I'm shooting panorama is identify the south. If you start in the south and end in the south, if the first photograph you take, if the middle of the photograph is in the south, and you use a stitching software to wrap it back around, the point where it meets will end up being the front of the dome. And one of the beautiful things about Panorama Factory, about that software for stitching, is it will take this first photo and it will actually use the right side of one strip and the far other side of the strip. It will compare them and it will blend them across the middle of the image. This is actually part of a pan, and this is Panorama Factory blending them together. A lot of stitching software like Canon Photo Stitch or something, it's really good at blending everything together, but where it wraps around and meets at the front, basically, it won't do a very good job of getting them to line up. And then you have to manually do it yourself. Panorama Factory does a wonderful job of sort of blending the front as well. So the great thing of this is it'll just wrap around, the south will be in the front, and in Starry Night, that will end up being the front of your dome. So what I do as I start to take these pictures is I try to find an object that I know is in the south, and I put that right in the middle of my photograph. And then what I do is I always turn to my right. I always take another photograph to the right. The reason I do that is if you keep working your way to the right, then when you open these individual photographs up later, they will be in order in as files. It'll be file and then a file to the right and then a file to the right. If you go the other way, it'll open up the files sort of backwards from right to left. The numbered files going higher will be in reverse order, and you have to tell the files to get reversed. Does that make sense? You'll get them in a sequential numbered order if you turn to the right. So the one thing you want to do is to decide how far to the right you want to turn is I go halfway to the right. In other words, I'll look at something that's the center point of my photo. And this is the only mistake that I often make when I'm shooting pans is I forget to look at what is that thing in the middle of the photograph, right? So I always try to register, aha, that little building tower is right in the middle. And then I move to the right so that that thing that was in the middle is now at the left edge of my photograph. So what I would do here is I would make note of the fact that in the center here is kind of just to the left of this tree or kind of halfway down this slope. And then I would move to the left so that that point was at the left and I'm getting 50% overlap. About 50% overlap between photos is pretty friendly for a stitching software. It likes to see 50%. If it's too little, it has a hard time comparing. If it's too much, then it sort of gets confused. It's trying to compare too much, all right? So just the basic rules again, just going through all of the aesthetics again. Pick a location where you see kind of cool, interesting, maybe familiar things, and make sure they're pretty large in your photograph. Roofs are not always a good thing. And part of that roof thing is it's kind of nice if you're shooting in the upward direction, if the interesting things around you are up rather than straight ahead or down. Try to shoot the panorama on a hazy day or a cloudy day if you can. Watch out for things that don't fit into the field of view. If they don't fit into the field of view, think about whether you might be able to just point your camera up, grab the top of it, and then later on in Photoshop, stick it back in again. That can work surprisingly well. And the geometry tools in Photoshop give you so much power, it's actually pretty easy to get the geometry to correct for it, okay? As far as cameras go, regular field of view lens, don't use wide angle. I still like using the camera. Typically when you spin around, I've found for whatever reason, for almost every panorama I'm doing, it ends up being about 12 photographs, 10, 11, maybe 12 photographs. So what I like to do when I've gotten all the way around to the beginning, I like to make sure the right edge of my last photograph is at least in the middle of the photograph. Sometimes what I do is just go right back around. Don't try to sort of outsmart your pictures and try to stop your 10th or 11th photograph way over here. You can be kind of lazy and just go almost right back to where you stop. I find for whatever reason, I don't know why, I almost always end up with the right edge of my last photograph being right here in the middle of my last one. I try to get it that way, okay? All right, so let's talk about stitching software a little bit. I have mentioned many, many times a software called Panorama Factory. I tried a bunch of them. I started with a Canon camera and it came with its own software. And I think cameras is called Photo Stitch. I liked Photo Stitch. It was very, very easy to use, but it was bad for two reasons. One, it had that problem where the image wrapped around and the end points of the image met. It never lined them up in a good way. It just did a very poor job of that. And it was really, really terrible for light balance. It just didn't, if the images were not sort of even in terms of light, it didn't light correct very well. There's a freeware, I don't know if it's still available. I don't know if any of you have heard of Auto Stitch. This freeware Auto Stitch it's amazing. The end results are really great, but it's incredibly hard to use. You had to take two and stitch them together and then take those and stitch them together with another two. And it took like 2 hours to do it. And you'd get confused and forget. I just literally have never discovered anything as good as Panorama Factory. And frankly, I would never recommend anything else. Not that I would ever tell you, not to pay the license for it. And the license is cheap. Like the full license for Panorama Factory is $79 or something, 80 bucks. It's a relatively affordable piece of software. But if you download the freeware, The only watermarking it does, if you haven't licensed it, is it puts a little teeny watermark right in the middle of your pan. Those little teeny watermarks are awfully easy to Photoshop out. If they're in the middle of the grass at the bottom of your pan, they take about 10 seconds. So I'm not saying don't buy it because it's a really powerful tool, but if you're only going to ever shoot one pan, consider downloading Panorama Factory. You might find a little watermark. Maybe they fixed that. For all I know, a bunch of people were doing that, and now it's a giant watermark.
Scott,
Yeah.
I believe now it's a 30-day trial, and then you have to pay for it. So if you're only making one, I think you're still in the clear. But if you're going to try and keep the free version for longer than 30 days, I think they've kind of patched that a little bit.
Right, right. Okay. All right. Um, Let me show you a couple of examples here really quickly. I guess Bay City is a good example. This is the one I was talking about with Leslie, where I was saying none of these buildings are the same thing that they used to be. They don't look alike anymore. Whoops, sorry, whatever the heck I did. Control Z. Dude, come on. There we go. This was a sunny day. And the problem was, because it was a sunny day, I was looking into the sun, like in this direction. And then everything got darker as I kind of went across. I mean, this should be incredibly uneven, but because I use Panorama Factory to do this, it's just, the light levels are perfectly corrected. They're really, really good. Like every pan that I've ever shot with Panorama Factory, it just does a spectacular job. And you can see there's all kinds of crazy detail in here. There are probably 10 seams in this panorama. And no matter where I go, I mean, look in this brick pattern, for example. You would think if stitching software is handling this brick pattern that you would see seams somewhere. I've just never seen a stitching software that did such a great job of correcting for all that stuff. It's just absolutely brilliant. So I couldn't recommend it more. Just a couple of things about panoramas. When you shoot them all, you're going to end up with this row of photographs. And like I said, remember, if you turn to the right as you're shooting, notice that, well, if these were recognizable buildings, you would see that I'm going in the direction in terms of my file numbers. Panorama Factory, I wish I had it installed here. I'd love to demonstrate it for you. Most software, you open up a good, professional software, and a lot of times they throw this wizard at you. They throw this, all you have to do is hit next to go through the steps. And I've never seen a software where if you use their wizards, you're happy with the results. Panorama Factory, the wizard is brilliant. I've never used anything but the wizard. It says, do you want to open the slides? And all you do in Panorama Factory is you select the first one, you choose the last one, and it opens them up in a strip. And then you just hit next, 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 next. None of the settings require any work except one. There's a setting about 4 steps in where it asks, are you projecting onto a cylinder or are you projecting onto a sphere? You'd be very, very tempted to choose spherical layout rather than cylindrical layout, right? Because we're projecting on a sphere. The thing to keep in mind with that selection is Starry Night automatically geometry corrects everything for a sphere. So Starry Night wants you to make a cylinder. So the one thing you want to keep in mind if you're using Panorama Factory, don't be tempted to use spherical geometry. It's going to bend, kind of warp everything in, give it sort of a point at the top. And then Starry Night's going to exaggerate that and it's going to look goofy. So make sure you select cylindrical projection, then just go next, 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 next. And the result at the end of it, when you're done, is going to be something that looks like this. And again, I want to scan across this to show you how perfect this is. Audacity, no way. Here we go. Sorry, the reason I keep clicking wrong is I'm trying to drag smoothly so it's not quite as jerky, but my mouse doesn't want to do it. I'm just blown away by the quality of this. So what you end up with is a strip, a wide strip. And, everything should be stitched together. In terms of editing this now, you are going to end up with a very, very, very big image. You'll probably end up with an image that's 25,000, 30, sometimes 40,000 pixels across. A thing that you want to keep in mind with your camera, there's a temptation with an SLR, or even if you've got a little point and shoot, or even if you're doing this with your phone, to set the resolution of the camera very high. Don't do that. Like imagine each photograph is 4,000 pixels across. After you've stitched like 12 or 16 pixels, you're going to end up with an image that's like 70,000 pixels across. That's way too big to deal with. Your computer is actually going to have a hard time opening that image. So you can actually set your settings to like medium or low, and you're going to end up with still an image that's like 12,000, 16,000 pixels across. So don't worry about going really high resolution. If your pixels are really big, Panorama Factory may chug along for 45 minutes doing this stitch, and then your image is going to be so big that it might take 10 minutes to open it in Photoshop. So go ahead and use lower resolution settings on your camera. All right, so what we have now when we've taken this photograph is an image that's mostly ready to go for Starry Night. But the one problem with this image is the sky is still in the image, and Starry Night wants to draw the sky. So if we were to drop this in as a panorama, the problem would be you would see these buildings in this Mesoamerican site, but it would have this sky in the image, and then it would just be chopped off at the top, right? You would have weird clouds in a photograph that just have a hard cut at the top. So what we want to do is we want to replace this sky with Starry Night. Or in simpler terms, we want this sky to go completely away. So what we want to end up with in the end is we want everything that's solid ground, everything that's actually represents the ground, to be in the photograph. And we want everything that represents the sky to be taken away, or more specific, in our photograph, we want it to be transparent. When we're all done with this, what we want is a picture like I had over here in Bay City. We want a picture where the ground, the stuff that represents solid ground or trees or whatever, to be a photograph. And we want everything that's the sky to be a checkerboard in a PNG file, in a .png file. Okay. So what we have to do is remove the sky. And there's a lot of tricks in Photoshop that make this easy. And it all just kind of depends on what terrain you're seeing. You know, building terrain is very difficult to work with in trees. Ground is very different to deal with in buildings. So there are different techniques in Photoshop. So the first thing I want to do with my image, I've got to have my layers showing. It's very important to be looking at layers. So I'm going to go over to the side here and make sure that I'm seeing the layers pane here. I'm going to make sure that's visible. And the very first thing I want to do, this is probably a little small on your screen, I apologize, but when you open a lot of images, if you've made like a flat image here, most of the time when you're in Photoshop, you'll notice that that image is named background. You'll see this little tiny image under Photoshop's layers, and right next to my image, my only layer that's showing here says background. You can't really edit well if that's called a background. So the very first thing I do when I open the image is I double click on this layer that says background. And sometimes I just hit OK. You can give it a name. I could call it like pan or something. But the most important thing is you just rename it to anything other than the word background. And what it does is it turns it into a layer that's much more editable. Now that it's not a background, you have the ability to do complicated layering and cut things out in a good way. So the word background in italics, like you saw originally, is a bad thing. So the very first thing I do is change the name of that so it's not a background. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go up to the little tiny hamburger in the top right, and I'm going to make a new layer. And whatever, I can call it sky, or I can just leave it as layer 1 or whatever. I'll call it sky. And I'm going to grab this layer. I'm going to see how sky is above pan. I'm going to grab this layer and I'm actually going to drag it below pan. So now I've got blank. I've got that checkerboard behind my panorama. That checkerboard like we saw over here in Bay City, that's another layer, all right? And I'm going to do it again. This is a little trick I like to do, and I'll show you why I do it a little bit later. I'm going to grab one more layer. I'm going to call it black. And I'm going to drag it behind the other two. So now I have pan, I have sky, I have black. This is not mandatory, but there's a reason that I do this. Okay, I'm going to please zoom out here. I'm going to take this layer and I'm going to make it completely black. The reason I do this is because as I'm making my pan, as I go along, I like to be able to see what this all looks like at night. This is my black sky in the background rather than blue sky in the background. So what I can do now is whenever I want, I'm going to be able to turn on this black layer, and what's going to be behind it is sort of the approximation of Starry Night's nighttime sky. And you'll see why that's important a little bit later on, okay? So I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna make sure that I have my pan layer selected, my foreground layer, and I'm gonna zoom into way over here on the left side. And we're gonna talk about techniques, Photoshop techniques for chopping out the sky. This is a little bit of work, guys. Getting rid of your sky, I've never done it in less than like 3 or 4 hours. And frankly, if you do it right, the results are great. If you do it wrong, the results look kind of cheesy on the dome. So, you know, I'm not saying, you know, everybody has to throw 3 hours at this, but your panoramas are up for a very long time. The audience spends a lot of time looking at panoramas. So I like to take a little time and actually make it look kind of good. So there's, like I said, there's lots of different parts of the pan and lots of different techniques. If I'm over on sort of solid ground like this, a tool that I like to use is the polygon lasso tool. If you look in the tools over here in Photoshop, by default, what it's going to show here is a little thing that looks like a lasso, like a horsing, like a rodeo cowboy's lasso. If I click on that window and hold down, I can pick one called the polygon or the polygonal lasso tool. What I love about this tool is if I click on a point, I know it's a little hard to see, but as I move the cursor around, it generates this little line. All I have to do is just keep clicking on points that are at the transition between the horizon and the sky and just keep working my way along. What I like about this is if the area is fairly straight, I can just drag a long way. And the great thing too here is nobody knows in this Mesoamerican site, El Tajín near Veracruz in Mexico, what the real shape of the top of this pyramid is, right? I can be a little sloppy. I can just go here and here and here and here and down again. And where it's ground like this, it's just roundish ground. So I can work my way along pretty quickly, right? So I'm covering a lot of ground. And then the top of the building here's got some little squared off bits. I go down, over, down, over, down, over. So I can cover a lot of ground. I can just go down, 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 down. And I don't worry about being super accurate because if you guys remember how small this is, a small part of the pan, I don't have to be accurate. This is a tiny part of the pan. So I'm going to work my way all the way around this building until I reach these trees down here. Then I'm just going to go up to the top. I'm going to slide over here and I'm going to work my way back to the beginning. If I double click, it connects all of that. So it just made a mask that connected all that stuff. And if I had hit delete, I've just chopped out everything that's sky. Okay. So if I zoom back now, sorry guys, didn't mean to do that. If I zoom back, you can see how much of it I've taken care of. That's a halfway decent chunk of the pan, right? So now I'm in a different territory here. And I want to talk about one of the most, I think, frequently overlooked tricks that you can do in a pan to make it look really realistic. Think about, I'm standing in the middle of a set of pyramids here in El Tajín, and I think the top of this hillside is maybe half a mile away, maybe even 3/4 of a mile away. By the way, if you've never been to El Tajín near Veracruz, this is one of the most impressive Mesoamerican sites. Every hillside you see in the background is jungle growing over a structure. Veracruz is like 16 square miles of Mesoamerican city, and every one of these hillsides is buildings that have yet to be excavated. It's massive. It's really tremendously huge. But the point I'm going to make is this is about a half a mile away or a few hundred yards away. When we look at this, does this transition here appear to be in focus? Is it really sharp? Kind of soft, right? Take a look at almost every Starry Night pan. If there are mountains that are miles away or tens of miles away, every single pan you'll see, except for a few in Starry Night, the people who cropped this made it really sharp. Try this trick. Take an eraser. Your eraser tool is about halfway down. It looks like a pencil eraser hitting a surface. Take your eraser and rather than making it really tiny, leave it a little large, not quite that large, but leave it about maybe this big. And then when you erase your sky, let's see, do I have it set to? I need to make sure it's set to 100. Oh, not sized, yeah. About that big. I'm not sure. Oh, I know why. I forgot to. By the way, I think my mask is still on in Starry Night. So let me hit Command D. Oh, good grief. Sorry, guys. Let me just get you back into Photoshop here. There we go. Does anybody know why I'm not erasing here? That is very odd. Anyway, if you could, I'll figure it out in a moment. If you could see me erasing here, Control D, maybe I've got a mask. Yeah, there we go. Sorry, guys. I had a area selected. What I do in areas like this is I'll set that brush maybe even a little bit bigger so that what I get is more of a soft, fuzzy transition rather than a sharp transition. And trust me, when you see this off in the distance, when it looks just a little mushy and fuzzy, it isn't going to have that bizarre, artificial, overly sharp thing. Take a look at pans in Starry Night, and you'll notice things way off in the distance have this weird, they're too present. They're a little too sharp. So if you can make it soft, that helps. So those are the two tools I'll use is the eraser tool. And if things are kind of soft, a lot of times I don't worry about making them perfect. I'll just kind of work my way along here and let it be soft. The most difficult challenge with panoramas, and some of you have probably run into this already, is trees that are close up or trees that have a lot of spaces in between them. It can be really challenging in these areas, especially areas like this, to get the trees to look realistic. And what many people will do, and I don't favor this method, people will go in and they'll try to like auto select all the white stuff, or they'll try to, chop out each little bit of white. And I can do that. I can grab my magic wand tool here. See, where do you live, magic wand? And I can try to grab the white in between here. Like just let it automatically grab everything white and then hit delete. But this is why I have a black sky in the background. The result you're going to get, and you see this in a lot of Starry Night pans, is a lot of artificially just sort of weird white dots, right? Where the tree areas are supposed to be black, they end up kind of looking white because the magic wand tool didn't grab them well. And this is really, one of the most common things you'll see in a ton of Starry Night pans is you'll look at the trees and you kind of go, that doesn't look realistic to me because you have this effect. So I have a very, very different way of dealing with this. Rather than try to chop them out individually, I like to kind of build trees up rather than trying to tear them down. So I want to show you a little technique. It's a really, really useful tool in Starry Night, and it's going to be hard for me to find. But the first thing I do is any of these areas here where I see a whole bunch of little white speckles, I just get rid of it. I just dump it. I'm going to make my eraser pretty big. I know it's sacrilegious. I'm just getting rid of huge amounts of the pan, but there's a reason for this. Those leaves, those areas with all the white, they're gone. Now, occasionally you will run into a tree where its trunk, oops, where the trunk part of the tree is so interesting. It's just so visually distinct that you want to preserve it. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll sort of build the trunk back up. I'll clone some trunk up here. But for the most part, I'm just going to fill this in with leaves myself. So if you go to the paintbrush tool, and I should have found this thing earlier, I'm going to have to go hunting. But if you go to the paintbrush tool and you search for brushes, way, way, way down the list, somewhere really far down, you're going to find a thing that's called a leaf brush tool. I'm not sure I see it here. Let's see. I'm going to have to do some searching here. Oh, I'm sorry. It's here, actually. It's in this thing. And I believe it's under, sorry, guys. I should have searched for this quite a while ago, but I believe it's under special effect brushes. You're going to see a thing that's like little leaves. This was so much easier before they let Kyle put all of these brushes in, because now they're very hard to find. Concept brushes, screen tone brushes. Is anybody familiar enough with Starry Night or with Photoshop to remember? Yeah, curse you, Kyle. Seriously, like this used to be incredibly easy to do. And now the leaf one is so hard to find. And I should really apologize.
That folder that you're in right now, there's one that says foliage somewhere. That's one that I use often.
Okay. It's its
even
own,
though it starts with Kyle under the special effects.
yeah, the problem is these are all the brushes I seem to have. And I would think it would be, geez, I'm just wondering if they're even included. If anybody has got Photoshop open, oh, Kyle, you're drunk. I love it. We try this one more time here. Huh. Yeah, sorry guys, I'm not sure I'm gonna find it. All right, I'm gonna try to use like a spatter brush just to get that effect. This isn't gonna work exactly, but it may do the trick. When you find it, there is a brush that looks like a little tiny leaf, and I think it's gonna work a little like this spatter brush. So what I'm going to do, and actually I'm going to use the clone tool for this, and maybe it's under clone. Maybe that's why I'm not finding it under paintbrush. I think I'll use the clone tool. Same thing, right? Under clone, we don't have any different ones. No. Okay. So I'm going to make this brush fairly small. And I'm going to grab a part of the green here. And to sample these things, what you do is you hold down your Alt key and you grab a little part of trees here, and then you wave this thing around here. I'm using the clone stamp tool or the brush tool, either one. I grab a color down here and I wave it around up here. The beauty of the leaf tool is it draws little tiny leaves. They're actually leaf shaped, right? But a cool thing is if I use this clone stamp tool and I try to grab a brush that looks like spatters, it'll actually grab this area of leaves and it'll kind of paint it over here. So it'll sort of grab this group of leaves and it'll paint them in over here, and grab this group of leaves and paint them in over here. Grab here. So again, guys, I wish I had found the leaf brush, because leaves, when you do this with leaves, it looks a lot more realistic. But you see what I'm doing is, rather than chopping out the old image to make a whole bunch of white spaces, I'm just painting in new image, and I can do it over here. And when you do this well, when you back away, it looks very, very realistic. It looks exactly like trees. This takes way less time than trying to do it by chopping out the old stuff. All you have to do is just grab sample some leaves from down here, paint them in up here, sample leaves from down here, paint them in from down, and eventually the results are going to end up looking exactly like the tree looked before.
Scott, I've got a question, if you don't mind.
Yes, please go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that does look better already. But I was curious, have you had any success using the Refine Edge tool in Photoshop under Select and Mask?
I know. For some reason, maybe it's just my style. I've never been a fan of the tools that Photoshop creates to do all the work for finding edges for you. Because what I end up doing is I'll go along, first you have to kind of work your way along the edge a little bit, right? You have to tell it what the edge is. Then the first time you do it, the results usually look a lot like the clone stamp tool. And then I find I spend so much time going back and sort of doing it again, doing it again, doing it again. And it gets me 90% of the way there. I just like control. The reason I like this technique is if I want it to look just like that right there, I make it. I'm inventing the way I want it to look rather than letting the tool do the work. So I'm not arguing that the tools don't do it. I like the end result to look like this. And frankly, I've made probably tens of thousands of little holes. It took me all of about 6 minutes to do it, 12 minutes because I had to try to find the leaf tool. But this has been my preference. I like the end results that you get with this. So
sure, okay.
And in particular, I really like how it looks at night. I know that's a little dark and hard to see, but the great thing is you don't get those thousands of little white spots that you get almost every time you use an edge tool. It still leaves a little bit of white, and that's what sort of breaks everything. By the way, I was using the clone stamp tool before, and I didn't really explain it. The day that I was in El Tajín, Mexico, it was like a Tuesday morning, and I had like the entire park to myself, except when I took this panorama, this cute little Mexican couple happened to be sitting on this bench. And I just wanted my pan to be perfect. So I wanted to get rid of this little couple. Here's a really, really great use for the clone stamp tool. I want to show you how it works. The beautiful thing about the clone stamp tool is it's basically designed to take some area of your picture and reproduce it somewhere else in your picture. The clone stamp tool looks just like this little rubber, those old-fashioned rubber stampers. And if you select that, and then you set the size of that brush to be, depending on how big an area you're going to brush. I want to grab this stuff and paint it over this guy. So what you do with the clone stamp tool, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so you see what's going on. When you hold your Alt key down, it gives you this little crosshair, and that's the area that I want to sample. So let's say I want to take this rocky stuff and put it over here on top of this guy. If I hold my Alt key down and grab the rocky stuff, then when I move the cursor over, it paints that area. See the little crosshair moving around? Paints that area onto an area somewhere else. Now, one thing you want to be careful about as you're doing this is it's going to look identical to something over here. And a lot of times what you'll see people do is they'll sample here and they'll paint here. And then they'll sample here and then they'll paint here. And one of my favorite websites, if you've never been there, is Photoshop Disasters. And they show this a lot. There'll be these obvious clones where you see the same thing repeated over and over and over and over and over. But there's an easy way around that. And I actually find it kind of fun to do. If I'm painting this area here over here, since it's such a rough, rocky area, maybe I'll just grab a tiny bit of that rock or grab a little of that and paint, grab a little of that. And it ends up getting all kind of rough and random. And rough and random looks pretty good, right? If I just grab some of that. So rather than being really predictable and painting the same thing over and over again, don't be shy about grabbing a little mess here and painting it down here, grab a little mess up here. And if I'm careful, there goes that guy. Now over here is even more fun because there's this nice uniform rocky pattern. I'm just going to grab some of this stone here, paint over there, and I can grab some more stone. I want to try to kind of line it up, but it's rough stone, so it doesn't really matter. Grab a little stone here, grab a little stone there, grab that stone and put it over there. And if I'm good, I can basically get rid of this old couple. See how I'm getting a little predictable here? Like I've got the identical stone. Maybe I grab a stone from up here and bring it down there. Now it looks pretty darn random, right? Maybe I can grab these stones from up here. And after a while, and I can do the same with the grass down here. I can do the same thing with the sidewalk or this, kind of stone if I'm careful. And I'll even take this black and paint up here. So, I've left some disembodied legs there, but there's certainly a lot less Mexican couple there. All right. So 2 tricks that I really like in Photoshop. This painting tool, especially if you can find the leaf brush rather than whatever brush I used, wonderful, wonderful trick for making tree leaves. And that clone stamp tool is really useful too.
Hey, Scott, if you haven't already, could you address difficulties in making panoramas shot during the winter when there are no leaves?
Well, that I find is actually an even easier scenario, because then you've got the trunks already, right? You've already got the trunks. Find your leaf tool and just use the paintbrush and make it green, right? And there's only one problem. I'm going to go with an extra bright green here, just so you can see what I'm doing, so it's not too dark. And then again, I'm going to try to find one of those random brushes that I was using before. So I can use one of these random tools and paint green, but the problem is it's going to look so uniformly green that it's artificial. So a great trick for that is now make a darker green. I'm going to make the brush a little bigger so my leaves are a little more spaced. And do a little painting around. And then do another green, maybe kind of some trees have sort of a brownish green color. So maybe use this brownish green, paint around again. And after you've done that a few times, if you get your spacing right, you can actually add leaves to blank trees. I know it's tricky, but you can actually do that. All right. There's one thing that I've been meaning to do ever since I made my first panorama, which is once I've made these trees, it would be really nice of me to just cut them out and build up a library of trees so that you guys could just go in and I'll paste in a pine tree, I'll paste in an evergreen tree, I'll paste in a palm tree, but I've never done that. But this tool actually works pretty well. And from a distance, and this is a pretty small tree, these can be very convincing. In the panorama, if you had that going, as crude as it was that I did, that's pretty realistic. That'll work pretty well. Okay. So when you're all done, when you've completely finished up, when you've done that trick of painting all your leaves in, this is another example where I used that leaf brush and painted the leaves in. When you're all done and you've painted them in, you're going to end up with a panorama that looks like this. Okay. Everything that's not terrain is going to be checkerboard. That's your sky. Everything that is terrain is solid. That's your photograph. That's the stuff that's going to show up in Starry Night. Okay. You want to save this as a ping file. .png. That's the only file type that Starry Night's going to be really happy with. For those of you who have been doing this for a while, those of you that have experience, PSD files used to work. And then Clint and I discovered they were becoming unstable. He thinks when Starry Night version 8 happened, that something he thinks maybe Starry Night decided on pings exclusively. So it used to be that PSDs and even I think TIFFs or something might have worked. Anything that supported layering like Targas would work. These days, I think .png files will work. So you want this to be. I still like the power of 2 rule. What I will do is I will use a power of 2 number, and I forget what that is, 1024, 4098, 8120 or something, anyone 26, something like that. I will still use power of 2. And I tried it to get it to be like, I like the 8,000 or the 16,000 wide, and either the 512 or the 1024 high, if you can get away with that. Okay. So Clint is still not 100% sure whether it has to be powers of 2. So I go ahead and just make it powers of 2 just to be safe. Okay. So follow the same rules that Michael taught in Photoshop. If you have to add a little bit to bring it up to a power of 2, just add a little bit. A little blank panorama at the top is not a bad thing. Okay. All right. So the last thing I'm going to do now that we've covered Photoshop is I'm going to get rid of this. Let me just hide Photoshop over here. And I want to talk about actually placing them into Starry Night. Brad, would you do me a favor? I'm going to let, you're still there, right?
Yep.
I'm going to let you take over because I don't recall. I used to know where the panoramas live. Would you point me at panorama files? I'm just going to work my way through here. I'm going to go into my PC and I'm going to be in the C drive, correct?
Yes. We'll go into program data. So if you can't see it there, you can just go up to the top where it says C.
Yeah.
And just click after that.
Uh-huh.
Like to the side, like in the empty space.
Yep.
No, further over.
Oh, over here.
Yeah. And then after C:/, click there and just type in program space data.
Got it.
I think there's a space. We'll find out. It might be one word. Okay, take away the space. I always forget that.
There we go.
And now you want to go to simulation curriculum. It's really buried in. This is why we put shortcuts on desktops, on your side items. Preps, sky data, and then panoramas should be panoramas. Yep.
All right, you can ignore all these folders. Just slide down past the folders. One thing you want to think about when you're completely done with this is what you name that file. Be careful not to give it an extremely long name, like maybe you've been dealing with 8 different files, so you were careful and you name this one like My North Museum Looking South Panorama. Because when you set this up in Starry Night, you're going to have to you're going to need to write that name in or paste that name in other places. So it's a good idea to keep it fairly brief, or one that you can remember really well. So you are going to need a text file. You're going to have the image file that's a ping, and you're going to drop it into this folder. But you're also going to need a corresponding text file. Let's see, view details. So you're going to notice there's, Brad, would you explain one thing? I'm only seeing text documents. I'm not seeing images.
Probably, there's Eastern Snow and Eastern Gem.
Okay.
Most of these are stock Starry Night, so they're already DBS and they don't.
I see. Gotcha. Okay. This is a little confusing, guys. And the Starry Night has a convention where only the new ones that we put in do we see the file names. Otherwise, the actual image files are hidden in these folders. But I'm going to go down to the one that Dave shot, which is Eastern Snow or Eastern Gem. You'll notice that there's an image file, Eastern Gem, and then underneath it is a text file that has exactly the same name. You're going to want for your image a text file that has the exact same name as your image. So let's pretend that that one that I was just working on, El Tajín in Mexico, I called it L_Tajín, EL_TAJIN. I'm going to want a text file that has exactly the same name as my image file. And what I do is I just take any existing text file. I could grab Dave Bradstreet's Eastern Snow one. I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to paste it. And the only reason I'm doing this is I want a new file that I can deal with, right? All I've done is just grabbed another one and I've pasted it so that now I have an identical file. And I want to name that file exactly the same thing as the picture that I was working with. So let's say my picture was L_Tahine. Okay. Make sure that the file names are absolutely identical. Now I'm going to want to open this file with WordPad. Okay. And this file sets all of the parameters for the panorama. And don't get nervous that it's a very long file. Almost everything except for like 5 lines, you don't care about at all. Most of these are not the least bit important to you. Just remember that you're going to want to take somebody else's text file or some text file that you find in Starry Night, copy paste it, just make another one, name it exactly the same thing as your image file name, okay? Whatever it's called, you want to name it that. So there's only a few values that you care about. If you go a little bit down the list, you're going to see a value that's called pano name in quotations here. You can call this whatever you want. When you browse through the list of all the panoramas, this is going to be the name you see in that browse list. So that can be whatever you want. If I wanted to, I didn't have to call this L_Tahine. I could just call this Tahine if I wanted to. Now it's going to show up in the list in Starry Night. It's going to show up as Tahine. That's what it's going to be called. Make sure that you just put it in between the quotations and don't add any spaces or anything. It needs to be quotation, your name and quotation with no spaces, okay? The next one, eastern_snow.ping, that again has to be exactly the same as my file name. So I'm going to name that L_Tahine. Okay, it's got to be identical to my file name. Oftentimes, if you try to put this on the dome and you don't see it, if it's just gone, it's not missing, you'll go back and look at the file name and you'll see you'll have a little error. It's, you know, you had a cap where there was an underscore. Just make sure the case is correct and make sure the name is exactly the same, okay? The next one down is a value that's called image height. That will set how the position of the pan in the vertical. Sometimes you'll open it up and it's a lot of your picture is a little below the spring line, or you'll open it up and it seems to be way too high on the dome. You can set that value higher or lower, 10, 12, 15, 20, something like that. Between 10 and 20 seems to be kind of a normal value, but every picture is different. And the great thing is too, is if you have a bunch of grass at the bottom and like you've got grass and everything's too high, you can actually push some of that grass a little lower down and it'll just disappear below the edge of the dome. So you set the height there. The next one is image center. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I told you this wrong. I'm sorry. Center is what I was just talking about. Center in declination is how high it is up and down. Image height is actually going to stretch it or compress it. Sometimes it looks just bizarrely stretched in the dome, especially if somebody had theirs stretched out before. Height, sorry for the misinformation before, is how tall or short it is. You can sort of stretch it out or compress it with the image height. Image center in declination is raising it up or lowering it down. So if it seems to be too high up, you can lower it down. If it seems to be too low, you can raise it up. Here is one thing I should let you know. There is one of these files for your pre-flight and one of these files for your render box. I always do the one on the render box first because that's what I care about, right? The other one is the pan that just shows in the preview screen. I'm not too worried about that one, but I really care about what's the one on the dome. Start with the one that's on your render box. And here's the problem. You've got to close render box, open it up, make an edit. And then after you've made an edit and you've saved, you've got to quit render box and restart it in order to see the changes take place. I know that's a bit of a pain in the butt. You make an edit, you quit render box, you open it up again, you look at your edit, okay? So you will have to close render box each time you make an edit to a pan, okay? So the only other one you're probably concerned about is the image center, image center RA will rotate the whole pan one way or the other. So if you've got a thing that you think you want in the front of the dome and it's off to the side, just monkey with that RA, right ascension value. And if you get the number right, that thing will be in the right position in your dome, okay? So you've got a building that you wanted straight in the back, monkey with your RA and keep changing that value. Once I've got this all looking perfect on the render box, then I just take this file and I copy it over. I put it on my pre-flight. Because again, the pre-flight's a little sloppier. You don't have to have it absolutely perfect. Get it perfect for your dome and then take this file, put the same image in this file on your pre-flight in the same place, and then pre-flight will be perfect. It'll be good to go. Does that make sense?
Hey, Scott, I believe in Starry Night 7, this is shared, so you only have to do it once.
Okay, so you only have to do it once. All right. In that case, I would be looking at the render box to make all your edits, right? Because that's, again, the one you want to look really, really good. Okay. So again, you carefully give your file a name. It's got to be a ping file. Drop it into the Horizon Panorama shortcut or the Horizon shortcut on your desktop. Go in, grab any text file. Just take a text file at random and copy it. Give it the same name as your image file. Go into the file, and the values you're going to edit is what it's called in Starry Night, the Pano name. Give it the file name. That's got to be exactly the same as your file name. The image height will stretch it or compress it in the vertical. The image center in declination will raise or lower it if you need to. And the image center in RA will spin the pan if it needs to be spun. Okay. Once you've done that, you should be good to go. And I'll remind you too, all of this data, everybody, is in the course notes. Like, you don't have to memorize all this stuff. I was mostly trying to give you a kind of a scope of how this is done, how easy or difficult it is to do. So if anybody finds the leaf tool in Photoshop, or if there's a leaf tool in Affinity that you can find, somebody shoot me an email or something, because
Erin found the leaf tool. She's got it in the chat.
okay, I haven't been reading along in chat, but thank you very, very much. Where was it? Was it in some mystery place I wasn't looking?
I think you might have just missed over. It was in that very last folder, the special effects, and it was right towards the bottom. It started with one of those like Kyle's special effects, whatever, but then it said
that's
foliage
why
mix towards
I am
the,
so angry with Kyle. I mean, like, why somebody thought it made a lot of sense to name them all Kyle?
so actually 3 up from the bottom should be, yeah, right there. It says foliage
Oh,
mix
foliage,
2.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I still don't see the maple leaf. The one that always worked really, really well was that one in an older version of Starry Night that looked like a maple leaf, or not Starry Night, in Photoshop. I have a feeling if any of us go online and say, what happened to the little leaf brush that looked like a leaf, we'll probably get good guidance from the internet. So thanks for that, Erin. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions about Pan? I know we've covered a lot of territory, but go to the course notes and that will fill you in on most of this stuff. I think we might be about done because my dog is telling me that he needs a walk now. Yeah. Cool. So, okay. I think we're at the end of our day, everybody. Anything from the instructors of the staff about tomorrow or anything we want to cover?
So tomorrow is mostly kind of exercises. So we have an activity session first thing in the morning, and then after that we break apart into 3 separate kind of open labs. So we'll have a Starry Night open lab, an 18.4 open lab, and then kind of a production open lab. And they're not really going to be guided so much. They're just going to be, the Starry Night one. If you want to work on Starry Night, you have some questions on Starry Night, hop into that session. If you have some 18.4 questions, or you want to work on 18.4, do some programming, maybe work on some more lessons that you got from me and Scott, or maybe Dave, hop into the 18.4. And then if you're just kind of curious on production in general, of putting all the parts together, that kind of stuff, then you can go into the production open lab. So it's we expect to see kind of people kind of jumping in and out. If you have some questions on each of those topics, then you can hop in and out. That's kind of how we're envisioning that time period to go. And then lunch is going to be a longer lunch. I've said it in a few sessions, and that's the goal for that one is if you've worked on something during the week and you want to show it off, you like it, or you're curious if you did it right, that's what that time is going to be for. So people will be grabbing lunches, and then people will be sharing screens, showing what they've done, and then after that we have that'll kind of go right into the kind of just a discussion on this week. How did it go? What worked? What didn't? Did you like it? Would you do a virtual institute again? that kind of stuff. So, nothing super structured, nothing really new that we're going to be presenting to you. More of, a lot of time for you to do some of the stuff, practice some of what we've showed you this week, and final times to ask questions. So, see everyone tomorrow.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. Bye.